In the heart of India, where millions seek salvation by the sacred river, there exists a group of people just facing death head-on. They live among the dead, practicing rituals that would make even the most hardened of men flinch. This is not a legend. This is the reality hidden behind the smoke of the crematorium. And if you think you have seen it all, hold on to that thought, because what is about to unfold will test the limits of reason. Number 1. The ceremony. No one wants to see. A second time, there was no clear boundary to signal that you had entered their world. No gate, no welcome ceremony, just a bend in the riverbank. Ash falling like fine dust in the wind, and a man sitting on the ground, his face covered in gray ash, his eyes fixed. In his hands, he held a bowl made from a human skull. No one spoke. No one explained. Here everything is real. There is no stage. There are no actors. And when you begin to realize that you are looking at a meditation ritual on a corpse, not in a book, but right in front of your eyes, the question is no longer, what are they doing? But why do they choose to live like that? The Aghori do not hide in jungles or dungeons like secret societies in movies. They appear in broad daylight in crowded places, crematoriums, ghats along the Ganges, where life and death meet every day. They do not hide, but they do not invite anyone to come near. One of the most controversial Aghori rituals is Shav Sadhana, or meditation on corpses. Human corpses, often victims of drowning, or those without relatives, are used as meditation cushions, not to offend, but to free the practitioner from the ultimate obstacle, his own self-loathing. In their beliefs, corpses are not things to be feared, but a means to transcend fear. Some Aghori, so rare that only a few have ever been documented, eat portions of corpses as part of a ritual transgression. Not all Aghori do this, and not all of them do it. But even if it happens once, it is enough to turn the world upside down. Among the throngs of tourists who flock to Varanasi every day, only a small fraction are aware of their existence, and even fewer have ever encountered the Aghori in person. Photographers like Joey L., Cristiano Ostinelli, and Mikhail Hunyewicz on month-long trips have captured rare moments images of the Aghori meditating, smearing themselves with cremated ashes, wearing bone necklaces, or sitting motionless for hours in a trance-like state. These images quickly spread, accompanied by a series of conjectures. They had supernatural powers, they performed magic, they broke the laws of life and death. But most of them were just outsider accounts looking in. They spoke little. They did not preach. They did not need anyone to understand. In the eyes of the Western media, such stories became perfect headlines. Cannibal monks' necrophilia, cult meditation on corpses. Social media posts from 2024-2025, especially from some popular global weirdo accounts, continued to fuel the narrative attributing unverified acts to the Aghori, such as necrophilia and black magic. Academic studies, however, have viewed the Aghori as a radical spiritual phenomenon, one with its own philosophical basis, not simply the weird necrophiliac cult that the public imagines. They don't kill. They don't recruit followers. What they do, rather, is confront what society rejects. Head-on corpses waste decay and the transitory nature of the body. From the outside, it may all seem like a surreal performance. But for the Aghori, it is a serious, ancient, and demanding path. And what sets them apart most is the very belief that the rest of society cannot accept that the corpse is not unclean, but a temporary dwelling place for truth. From here, all judgment becomes blurred. What we consider ridiculous, they consider sacred. The death we want to avoid, they embrace as a necessary part of escaping the cycle of rebirth. And that journey, however puzzling, continues right in the heart of India's holiest city. And to understand why they dare to confront death as a sacred ritual, it is necessary to understand the philosophy that has nurtured them for centuries. Number 2. Philosophy beyond boundaries. Not everything they do is meant to shock. There is a coherent ideology behind their seemingly insane behavior, a philosophy based not on conventional morality, but on the elimination of discrimination. For the Aghori, there is no such thing as impure or pure, no fixed categories of good and evil. There is only one reality, and everything in it is a manifestation of Shiva. This philosophy is not new to the Hindu mainstream, but the Aghori push it to the extreme. They do not choose to separate themselves from the world like other yogis, but to merge with what humans have always sought to distance themselves from. Contact with dead bodies, smearing themselves with ashes from crematoriums, meditating in an environment that most would consider sinister. None of this is provocation. It is a wordless penance, performed not to gain forgiveness, but to shatter the illusion of separateness. Shiva, in their belief, is not just a god of destruction. He is the embodiment of all movement, all opposites, and beyond both. In the image of Shiva dancing in the circle of fire, Nataraja, the world is born and dissolved in rhythm. The Aghori do not worship him as a savior. They are one with him, believing that only by completely eliminating disgust, fear, discrimination, can one see the true nature of the universe. Drinking alcohol, taking drugs, or meditating in the dust are not simply breaking the rules. They believe that these moral restrictions are a product of society and therefore cannot lead to spiritual liberation. While mainstream Hindus seek purity through ritual, Aghori seek liberation by plunging into a place where purity no longer makes sense. This makes them difficult for much of Indian society to accept. But because of this, Aghori has become a special cultural symbol, a symbol of defiance of an uncompromising asceticism, where one abandons one's own good image in pursuit of the absolute. Some scholars call this a form of anti-human spirituality, where the ego is not honed but destroyed at its root. For the Aghori, enlightenment is not found on the top of a mountain or in a cave. It is the moment when you realize that the ashes on your skin, the smell of burning flesh in the air, the blank stare of a corpse, are as sacred as the chanting of mantras or the rosary. The absolute equality between life and death, between saint and outcast, is a belief they carry with them every day. Those who have witnessed an Aghori ritual describe the atmosphere as standing outside of reality. There is no loud noise, no preaching, just a person sitting motionless, sometimes with eyes closed, sometimes open as if looking through everything. The space does not force understanding, but if the observer is alert enough to keep his eyes open, he often falls into a state of tension, not because of fear, but because the silence strikes a chord with something he had never thought he would have to face. It is no longer a story about anomalous behavior. It is a stab at the heart of the question, what makes us believe that an action is right or wrong, sacred or profane? Once you get a sense of how they lived in that world, any sense of moral boundaries begins to crack. And from those cracks emerges not an answer, but a long history of those who chose to step outside the human orbit. Number 3. Mysterious timeline. No one really knows where they began. Their names echo in folklore, appear in fragments of ancient texts, then disappear, then reappear like a wisp of smoke drifting across history. Those known today as Aghori are in fact the latest chapter in a long line of disparate religious orders stretching back centuries under the shadow of Shiva. Baba Kinaram, the first recorded name, lived sometime in the 17th century. Legend has it that he lived for over 170 years, traveling through many lands before settling in Varanasi, where he established the first center of the modern Aghori order. No one is sure how much of this is true, but his presence lives on both. In the statues and in the rituals that his followers still observe today. Before Kinaram, many scholars believed that Aghori had connections to the Kapalikas and Kalamukas, two long-lost religious orders that existed between the 4th and 8th centuries. The Kapalikas wore human skulls as sacred symbols, meditated in cemeteries, and believed that liberation came only through passing through the darkest reaches of existence. Sound familiar? These vestiges formed the fabric of the philosophy that Aghori inherited. Yet, unlike other sects that have dissolved or died out over time, the Aghori have endured. Perhaps because they have not expanded, have not organized themselves as a church, nor have they made any promises to society. They have not sought recognition. They have not fought against anyone. Just as no one can accuse them, no one can erase them from the spiritual map of India. This historical stream does not follow a spiral of progress. It is like an underground stream, sometimes surfacing, sometimes subsiding, but never exhausted. In the periods when India was divided, invaded, reshaped by foreign powers, or internal politics, Aghori quietly existed, less deeper, quieter. For most Indians, Aghori history is not taught in schools. It is not in textbooks. It is not mentioned by name in cultural discourse. But in the villages along the Ganges, where the ashes of the dead float on the water every day, the folk memory of them is quietly passed on. Old people tell young people about a group of monks who, unlike any other, chose to live as if they were dead in order to understand life. There were no medals, no grand temples. There were only men bodies and a will that would not back down from the unbearable. Outsiders often think of the Aghori as the product of poverty, illness, or paranoia. But looking back over the course of history, it becomes clear that they were not a decline, but a choice. An extreme choice, perhaps, but one that has endured for centuries, not because of a mistake, but because it satisfies a quiet human need to find truth in the things no one wants to look at. From prehistoric Kapalika to contemporary Aghori, no passage is easy to understand, nor is any period entirely clear. But the closer you get to the core, the clearer it becomes. These were not people who had strayed from society, but people who had seen its true face and decided to turn their backs. In a country where religion is formalized, stratified, organized according to layers of knowledge and power, the Aghori are a countercurrent, and that is what keeps their history from being archived, but in the memory of the living, as if they were dead. Number 4. Aghori in Indian society. Not that India wants to talk about them everywhere. In a society still steeped in caste where purity is associated with nobility, the Aghori are a smoldering fissure that is avoided. They are not banned, not hunted, but they are not welcomed either. They exist on the margins, literally and figuratively. In Varanasi, the holiest Hindu pilgrimage center, people have become accustomed to seeing an Aghori appear near crematoriums. They do not interfere, nor do they touch. Some shopkeepers near the river tell of Aghori coming in for a bowl of cold rice, then disappearing for weeks. No questions asked, no exchange. Their presence an unnamed part of a spiritual fabric, too complex for anyone to reorganize. In more remote areas, there are places where people quietly treat Aghori with a strange respect. Not a glowing admiration, but a respect mixed with fear, the way one avoids disturbing a sleeping tiger in the forest. For them, Aghori can touch the invisible world. No one wants to confront them. No one wants to get close to them. The story becomes clearer when we look at the reactions of Orthodox Hindus. Serious devotees often do not want to include Aghori in the picture. For them, Aghori is a blemish, a darkness that should not be looked at directly. They practice through scriptures, through purification of body and mind, through abstinence and discipline. But Aghori chooses to touch dead bodies, drink alcohol, smoke marijuana, and reject the entire religious structure built over thousands of years. Surprisingly, despite their remoteness, the government has not seen the Aghori as a problem. They do not cause disturbances, do not harm the community, and have left little legal trail. Their silence is their most effective shield. Some officials in Uttar Pradesh have admitted that they are aware of the Aghori, but see no reason to intervene. Some areas even regard them as part of the local culture, weird, unpredictable, but not dangerous. Those who have lived near the Aghori say that what strikes them as strange is not their behavior, but the feeling that time stands still around them. No one knows what they do all day. No one knows when they leave. They threaten, no one convince, no one prove nothing. And it is this absolute indifference that makes them impossible to categorize. Not everyone can live on the fringes of society and still maintain such a visible presence. What is remarkable here is not how strange the Aghori are, but that society has become accustomed to them existing without any specific definition. In a system that is constantly trying to categorize control, they are the blank spaces that cannot be filled. And not because someone hasn't tried, but because they themselves have left no room for any description that could hold them for more than a glance. Number 5. Legal boundaries. Not all shocking behavior is illegal. In India, this is especially true of religious practices. The legal system here is designed to accommodate a wide range of beliefs, including practices that go against the grain of the rest of society. And that's why the Aghori have been able to survive without prosecution. The Indian government has no provision in its penal code that explicitly states whether a person can meditate with a corpse or smear ashes on it. Laws related to desecration of corpses, public hygiene, and public order are applied on a case-by-case basis, but they are rarely directed at the Aghori, in part because they are not troublemakers, and in part because few people dare to take the initiative to start a conflict with them. Rituals like meditating on corpses, eating body parts in rare rituals are not illegal as long as the body is not illegally disturbed. And it is here that the Aghori are always in a gray area. They often turn to bodies floating in the Ganges or left in crematoriums. There is no murder, no organ trafficking, no signs of coercion, so there is no clear legal basis for action. In Varanasi, where the Aghori are most visible, local authorities have adopted a low-key approach, monitoring without intervention. Several police officers have told the press that they are not instructed to monitor the group unless there is a specific complaint. The thin legal framework, combined with the sensitive nature of the religion, means that any heavy-handed action risks a social backlash. This situation creates a delicate boundary between religious freedom and civil rights. On the one hand, the law protects the right to practice religion. On the other, it discourages transgression of conventional moral boundaries. And between these two, the Aghori move quietly, neither recognized nor excluded. In many parts of the world, such behavior would be criminalized. But in India's legal structure, where diversity is seen as an essential component, the Aghori are an unwritten exception, not because they are allowed to, but because no one dares to impose laws on what they represent. And that reluctance, in a strange way, becomes a form of absolute tolerance. Number 6. Legal but unorthodox. No one had planned to put them on television, but then a viral photo, a shocking short video, a provocative enough headline, and the Aghori became a symbol of weirdness for a global audience. No context, no philosophical analysis, just a few seconds of a man sitting next to a dead body, and the story was set. Western media outlets were quick to capitalize on that appeal. Many stories labeled "Exploring Indian Spirituality" featured the Aghori as a macabre focal point, creating a stark contrast between faith and horror. One program called them a cannibalistic cult, while another highlighted images of skulls' ashes and the motionless eyes of a lunatic. Few bothered to question the symbolism or philosophical implications. The stranger the story, the more likely it was to go viral. Here another phenomenon began to take shape: dark tourism. In Varanasi, India's holiest pilgrimage site, thousands of tourists come to see cremations every day. Some of them led by local guides who know the way try to approach living Aghori near the Ghats. No official tour carries a sign saying, "Take you to meet the Aghori," but word gets around quietly. An encounter without a name, no commitment, no guarantee. Some come out of curiosity, some out of a sense of taboo, some with the illusion of spiritual enlightenment after culture shock. And not everyone is welcome. The Aghori do not talk to cameras, do not give interviews, do not cooperate to become the subjects of an organized tourist experience. Their silence makes the encounters all the more tense, sometimes lasting only a few minutes, but long enough for visitors to take home a story for a lifetime. Varanasi authorities have repeatedly warned against unauthorized filming at the cremation grounds. Local communities are also increasingly tired of the wave of tourists who are taking pictures invading sacred spaces with their lenses and crude curiosity. Some stretches of the river, once quiet with incense smoke and chanting, now struggle to endure cameras, drones, and insensitive commentary. Several international tour operators have been criticized for misleading advertising promising mystical experiences with an ancient cult, but instead taking visitors to crowded cremation grounds, framing the Aghori story in a way that satisfies stereotypes rather than adds to the understanding. For Indians, this is not just disrespectful, but a distortion of culture. There is no denying that Aghori images are powerful, but because of that, they are also susceptible to misuse. In cyberspace, where each image lasts only a few seconds before being swept away, what remains is a chilling sensation without any real understanding. Every step closer to them brings with it a lot of expectations to see something strange, something shocking, something paradoxical. But few people expect that the most haunting thing is not the action. It is the indifference to those looks. The Aghori do not need you to look at them in any way, and that is what makes all the cameras redundant. Number 7. When the world's eyes are on AGHOR. Not all cults are cults, but when it comes to the Aghori, this confusion is all too common, especially when their name is associated with bizarre rituals and shocking imagery. So what makes a group a cult? And why, despite all of this, don't the Aghori fall under that definition? There have been many groups around the world that have been labeled cults. For obvious reasons: strict control over their members, coercive behavior, psychological or physical violence, and even mass murder or mass suicide. NXIVM once operated as a sophisticated system of manipulation under the guise of self-improvement. Aum Shinrikyo, after spreading terror with its gas attack in Tokyo, is under strict surveillance to this day. The Order of the Solar Temple collapsed in tragedy, leaving behind a series of events that modern society still cannot fully understand. What about Aghori? There is no system of control, no dogma imposed on others, no recruitment structure, no incentives to join, no followers. They are scattered independent, without propaganda, without leading crowds. While extremist faiths often operate as organizations, the Aghori are individuals who have chosen a harsh lifestyle, a decision that is nearly impossible to replicate. There is no evidence that the Aghori have ever committed organized crime. The behaviors that have garnered media attention, eating body parts, meditating with corpses living among ashes, are personal, unrelated to victims or abuse. They are disturbing because they break conventional moral boundaries, but they do not cause systematic harm. Calling them extremists is more a matter of culture shock than evidence. The Aghori don't ask you to believe in them. nor do they persuade you to abandon family possessions or reason. They don't even care what you think. That puts them outside the usual framework. If anything, they're not like an organization with its own doctrine. They're like lone monks traveling upstream with no one to look up to. So what do we call them? An extremist branch of Indian spirituality. A relic of ancient traditions. A warped mirror of modern society's own insecurity about death. Any label is just an attempt to rationalize something that is hard to name. And sometimes the hardest things to name are the most persistent. For number 8 in the dark, there is enlightenment. Not all spiritual journeys are lit by candlelight or chanting. There are dusty paths hidden behind half-dead bodies where silence weighs more than words. And Aghori is one such path, rough, uncompromising, not for those seeking simplicity. In the end, they are not trying to prove anything. They are not seeking sympathy, nor are they seeking clarification. While most religions aim for purity and order, the Aghori go against the grain. They choose chaos. They choose to touch the forbidden. They choose to make their own bodies the place where the deepest limits of the mind are tested. And so, their presence forces outsiders to confront an uncomfortable question. Where is the real boundary between purity and pretense? Between physical filth and inner decay, when one accepts to live in the midst of death, not to resist, not to fear, but to understand what order are they disrupting that society tries to maintain. The media may choose to tell this story with haunting camera angles and shocking language, but the ultimate question is not the images, but the void that viewers feel afterward. A strange kind of void, both alien and difficult to break. Because it is not easy to ignore a group of people who live on the edge of the familiar world, rejecting everything we call civilization, and yet remain a silent challenge. Maybe no one wants to live like them. Maybe no one dares to come close. But it's hard to deny one thing: the Aghori reflect what most people avoid: death, decay, and the truth that nothing in this life is permanent. They don't romanticize death, nor do they paint it in fancy images. They drag it out into the light of day and sit face to face. What makes the Aghori remarkable is not what they do, but how they do not need others to validate them. In a world where people crave to be heard, to be understood, to share, the Aghori choose to remain completely separate. And that distance in its own way makes them carry weight, a quiet but unignorable whisper. Like ash, though light. If left long enough, it can turn an entire land gray. The Aghori did not try to leave a trace. But by existing, they became an indelible mark on the minds of anyone who knew them even once. Thank you for joining NVL Travel Documentary on a journey to the edge of the spiritual world, where all moral codes are challenged. The Aghori do not appear to be understood or debated right or wrong. They just exist silently, radically, and so different that they force us to look back at how we face life and death. This is not a story to believe or not to believe, but to feel and wonder, what is the real limit of human belief? If what you've just experienced has made you think, confused, or simply more curious, leave a comment. We always want to hear your perspective, especially on things as confusing as these that can't be ignored. Don't forget to like to support the quality content series, share the video with those who also love to explore the dark side of culture, and subscribe to NVL Travel Documentary so you don't miss out on the next insightful journeys. We will go further.